Today we're going to talk about the progression of the coronavirus, and I want to show you this visualization from the flightradar.com website that shows you a fraction of the flights which were internationally bound from China from the time of January 1st till the time of January 30th, when most countries finally decided to stop receiving flights from China. This is a rapid time lapse which should give you some sense on how fast a pandemic could actually spread. The coronavirus, of course, is not currently at a pandemic status, but the situation appears to be progressing. The World Health Organization has declared a global health emergency. This comes on the heels of the first human-to-human transmission of coronavirus in the United States. Now, we also have cases reported in other countries, including India, which has been a big concern for a lot of people because, of course, India is very densely populated, very poor sanitary conditions. The majority of the population doesn't have access to high-quality healthcare, and thus a system like that would be easily overwhelmed if this got out of control, and it would be very, very difficult to control. And if you already have the industrial machine that is China that's ground to a halt, if you throw India in the mix, which is the second largest country in the world by population, then we're in some serious economic trouble for the foreseeable future, and that's why you're seeing a panic in the markets right now. So the good news, which may help alleviate some anxiety here, is that in most of the cases that we've seen human-to-human transmission outside of China, the people who contracted it lived in fairly close contact with the person they caught it from. In both Canada and the United States, the people on the receiving end of the human transmission were both spouses of people who came from the city of Wuhan. Now, this is still a semi-airborne pathogen where it can be spread via droplets in the air. If a person sneezes or coughs and you are in range, they can potentially infect you, and of course this virus will stay alive on surfaces for a while, but in most of these cases it appears that people had prolonged exposure to the infected person. If we start seeing people who are infected who had no direct contact with people who came from Wuhan, that's when the real panic is going to start. And I'm not saying you should panic, but that's just the nature of these things. People are going to panic, and that in itself is probably going to create more problems than the viral outbreak itself. Now, some other good news, in spite of all the apparent bad news, is that of the 8,200 cases, there have only been 171 deaths. Now, I don't mean to minimize those lives of those who have passed, but this is promising because this means that perhaps that mortality rate is holding strong, where they predicted it to be around 2 to 3%. Now, this is still far higher than the seasonal flu, which takes the life of only 0.1% of its victims. So it's potentially 20 to 30 times more lethal. But again, we don't know what the mortality rate of this is truly going to be because there is a bit of a time lag in that of these 8,200 cases, only 143 people have recovered. Now, it would appear that with proper supportive care, people can recover from this. It's when a healthcare system adaptive capacity is exceeded and people can't get the proper care for the acute respiratory disorder, which seems to progress into this, that's when they start having problems. There have been reports of a so-called super spreader in China, someone also who apparently was asymptomatic. I believe it was a 10-year-old child who was documented to be asymptomatic and had infected many of their family members when they weren't even showing symptoms at the time. So there is a potential for this to reach pandemic proportions, but the actual fatality rate of this disorder, at least in its current form, is not very high. Now, these RNA viruses can potentially mutate for the worse, and if your local healthcare system is overwhelmed, it's going to be very hard to receive the care that you need. You can call it what you want in China, but at least they're building hospitals. It would be very hard to assemble the manpower to create that sort of infrastructure with our limited population here in Canada and the United States. So all the more reason to have the means to be self-sufficient for at least 3 to 6 months. If this thing really does go viral, because of all the panic surrounding it, you're going to see school closures, you're going to see mass absenteeism, and just all-around mass hysteria, to be honest. With absenteeism comes a disruption in the delivery of services. Some of those services might be essential ones, like law enforcement, emergency responders, because remember, if the health system is overwhelmed with cases like this, This doesn't mean that nobody has a heart attack anymore, or that nobody injures themselves or breaks a leg or breaks a hip. If it gets really bad and there are issues with the power supply, with the water supply, with the flow of natural gas, you may see much greater delays in getting those problems resolved. In addition to that, any hiccups in the just-in-time delivery system, that is going to lead to food and commodity distribution issues, which may well see food shortages at the consumer level. Now, this is all worst case scenario, and if you've been a prepper for some time, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. That's the good news. For everyone else, I would say that it's probably time to make a contingency plan if you don't have one. So we are at a point here where I'm still thinking this is DEFCON 5. I'm still on alert, but it's on the brink of becoming DEFCON 4. But we're really going to have to see how this progresses, because we have new cases in Vietnam, Finland, India, Nepal, Philippines, Sri Lanka, the United Arab Emirates. So this is pretty much spread worldwide, but we're still seeing single digits and very limited human-to-human transmission outside of China. With this new global emergency declaration by the World Health Organization, hopefully that helps to put the brakes on this thing. But as many researchers, including the Chinese government, has warned, this is potentially contagious throughout the incubation period where a person is entirely asymptomatic. So this may only be the beginning. So this visualization that you're seeing here, these are just a handful of the flights, probably 20 to 30% of the flights from China's major airports that were internationally bound out of China from the dates of January 1st till January 30th, the point in which many countries ceased receiving international flights from China. This is the actual flight data from flightradar.com. Now, I couldn't put all the flights on there because my computer kept crashing. So what you see here is multiplied by 4, and again, this is only what's coming out of China. There are thousands of connecting flights that you don't see here. So this should give you an idea of how fast a virus should spread around the world, and it's amazing that it hasn't happened yet. If you think about the Spanish flu in the year 1917, that was transported by boats. Commercial flights were just in their infancy, and there certainly weren't commercial flights on an international scale. So if there was a latency period with the onset of symptoms of a very lethal and virulent pathogen, before you could even detect it, you can see that it would be distributed around the world in a very short period of time. Now, in the case of the Spanish flu, obviously there was trench warfare going on. There was a lot of poor sanitary conditions. They didn't know a lot about disease at the time. People's standard of living was much lower. They had compromised immune systems. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about most of those things in the modern day, except that people are now far more urbanized and densely packed into cities. And you can see that the movement across the planet has accelerated 1 million-fold. So while this coronavirus may not be the big one, the conditions certainly exist to facilitate a pandemic of apocalyptic proportions. So even when this does blow over, and hopefully it does, because Lord knows I want to go ice fishing and camping, but I can't because my phone has been ringing off the hook, and I'm trying to get people the supplies they need should this thing blow up. It's likely those supplies are going to be needed somewhere down the road. So if we were to zoom in on this map, you can see that there is a lot of internal traffic within China between Wuhan and its other cities, which is why this, of course, spread so fast. And this doesn't include trains, buses, people commuting in their own personal vehicles. So it's no surprise then that this has spread as fast as it has. So let's keep an eye on this. Let's stay vigilant. Don't get lost in the panic, but be ready. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.